So, in an effort to try and help more people get into the Primus campaign, we're going to be introducing two new features. One will be what we're doing right now, sort of a catch-up mechanic kind of a thing, to showcase what has happened up till this case, which over the next few episodes we'll be discussing everything that's happened in the campaign, which has been quite a lot. This campaign's been going on for multiple years at this point. And then over in the future, we'll be doing summarizations every now and again for those who don't want to actually watch the full sessions that we'll be releasing every Thursday. The other feature, which will also be going live today, is concerning Primus, a little lore dump kind of a thing, where we talk about races, cultures, concepts, the way the magic works, the history, just generally talking about the lore of Primus, because there's quite a bit of a world there, and it's been quite of a requested feature, even by my own players, believe it or not. Now, for those of you unaware, there's already some blogs, or vlogs, or whatever the proper term is, of the adventures of Primus leading up to the point at which the live campaign started. But just for the sake of anyone who wants to start over, we're going to go ahead and cover all that stuff in brief, and then we'll go ahead and start over with the live campaign. The original campaign focused around 4 individuals, 2 who were denizens of Visay and Lascelles, and 2 who were regular denizens of the continent of Dareth. The 2 from the continent came to investigate Visay and Lascelles when the barrier that prevented it from being discovered from the outside world was lifted. I say barrier, it's not quite like that. It's more like if you were looking at Visay and Lascelles, if you were near it, you wouldn't see it. It would be as if it was not actually there. And if you tried to go towards it, you would find yourself automatically steering away from it. So even if the island... even if the island was literally right in front of you, at no point in time would it occur to you to be like, oh, there's an island right there. You'd just turn around and try to steer around it. So with that gone, they went out, investigated the island, found an extremely unique and primitive cellular culture, which we'll be talking about when we get to the lore discussion, where we'll be discussing Visay and Lascelles in depth and breadth. Suffice it to say, they got there, and within a short period of time, one of the people, a woman named Fiona Seal, led them kind of incidentally towards what was known as a temple on the island, and managed to find an entryway into it. Of course, she had never been there before, which is why this never happened before. It seemed keyed to her, and as they were going through, they found more and more signs that the people who lived there were of her species, her race. She was unique, you see, on the island. The island is almost entirely populated by humans, with a few elves and a few dwarves on the side. But the vast majority of humans, and Fiona Seal is none of these species. She's something different. We end up learning what she is. She is this race called a Scion, S-C-I-O-N. And the Scions were not good people, but I'll talk about that more later. After these revelations, they came to know that there was an individual who they called the Red Cloak. This person, who they believe was a Scion, although they weren't entirely certain, was going around murdering her people for some unknown ends and reasons. After the course of this, they decided to raise the island. I put that in quote-unquotes because the full depth of what had been done, I'll be talking about again more in the lore section, but basically, it's more like Visay and Lascelles was twisted in reality, and the Earth ley line kind of adjusted in reaction to that. So untwisting it, basically returning it to normal space of the reality, is what they were doing. Unfortunately, doing that completely severed the connection between the island and the ley line, which is important because Visay and Lascelles isn't a natural island. It is an artificial construct created directly from the elemental ley line of Earth. So it began to literally disintegrate and lose cohesion, and there was a bit of chaos and trouble amongst the people, not the least of which being those who had never really experienced things like particular amounts of fatigue or disease or inferiority with regards to genetics. There were people who had never, for example, had bad eyesight before, and suddenly just found that they couldn't see because they were no longer being automatically adjusted by the Earth ley line energy that was maintaining Visay and Lascelles prior. It was an interesting situation, extremely chaotic. Only 3 ships actually made it out of the island. The rest who attempted sank. And when I say that, I should also amend that several of those sank as well. One of them was the ship that was carrying Firnasil herself, sailing towards the metropolis of Holtberg, which we'll talk about in just a moment. Another one was a group of completely random individuals who were basically just fleeing for their lives, which contained only one individual of import, a young man named Rory. He'll be coming in later. There was also a young man named Hegaide, who was hiding on board the former transport, the one containing Firnasil and Flux. They sailed towards Holtberg, barely made it in time, and I don't want to go too much into Holtberg, but when I call it the metropolis, let's just say that it's larger than most states are. It is a colossally huge city. Once there, they were found almost immediately, thanks to some political and diplomatic negotiations, by a werewolf, a lycanthrope, who referred to himself as an agent of the House of Airfall. The party, of course, had no idea what that meant, but he basically said that his mistress believed that there was a method by which to fix the problem with their island, which was their primary concern, since when they left, Vassay-en-Lassalle was still disintegrating. So they were tasked to go to another island known as Mare-Lassalle, and given means to get there. Now, as it happened, although the party was not aware of this at the time, the removal of the barrier over Mare-Lassalle had happened sometime prior to this. In fact, prior to them even leaving Vassay-en-Lassalle. So it was easy to actually transit to Mare-Lassalle as long as you had some method of getting there. The two of them went there and discovered a race of people that they called themselves the Tumaroks. The Tumaroks were extremely communal creatures. They literally did not have an understanding of the concept of ownership. Everything was completely shared, everything was everyone's, and they all were incredibly good farmers, to the point where it was genuinely impressive the amount of skill and capacity they had. The center of Mare-Lassalle was dominated by a massive plateau, which people had not been up to for many, many years because of the dangers that lurked thereupon. Most people who went up there did not return, and especially as of late, at nighttime, strange things happened to anyone who was around the plateau. Naturally, this piqued the party's interest, but they got a little bit of additional info first, namely the fact that there was a large group of these Tumaroks who had apparently just heard some kind of call of some sort that they couldn't quite explain, and they had sailed off into the ocean and basically had not been seen since. Now, once they went up to the plateau, the first thing they encountered was something that I would normally refer to as an undead, but in this case, I want to clarify that statement. It was a Tumarok corpse, but there was nothing, it wasn't a typical undead, it was basically an animated body. No life, no unlife, simply a body that was still moving with nothing actually keeping it going. They had no real trouble subduing it, but they decided based on this that they absolutely wanted to get to the top of that plateau and figure out what the hell was going on. Once they got up there, they were astonished to find what the plateau actually was. If you can imagine a perfect, mathematically symmetrical terrain that was designed towards being farmed in layers, vertical layers, as in addition to horizontal and whatnot. In other words, layers of terrain that was just formatted so that you could have a field here and a field here and a field here, and it was just all in this perfect construct. With some completely off-the-cuff calculations, the party believed that the amount of food you could produce, food, produce, grain, animals, just about anything with regards to agrarian needs that you could produce on this plateau would probably feed the entire country. And by country, I mean, like, the entire country of Alluvia, for example, could all be fed from this one plateau. So the party continued towards the center where the control area was. As they started getting closer, they started hearing an unholy screaming that would not stop for breath. It was unceasing, unhesitating, nightmarish, and in pain. When they got there, they discovered another lycanthrope who was chained by these ephemeral chains to the area, right in front of the door leading into whatever the construct is at the center of the plateau. This gentleman was the source of the screaming, because as they observed him, it was clear that someone had done something to him to de-weave him, to literally deconstruct his very life essence at a molecular level, slowly. It was apparently causing him some truly nightmarish pain. The party felt that they had no choice but to give him peace by going after him and trying to defeat the chains, literally destroy the chains that were binding him. But once they did, all he did was immediately rip out his own throat and fall to the ground in peace. Moments later, more ghostly chains erupted from the door, grabbed the corpse, and dragged it back within. With that wonderful invitation, the party decided to journey into the area and found out that this was something of a library, a massive, expansive treasure trove of knowledge and information of the psionic people. They learned a lot of things about the psions here, which I will not bore you with now. It's kind of common knowledge at this point for anybody who's been following the campaign at all. And of course you have not, because you're watching this, so suffice it to say they learned that the psions built a massive world-spanning empire in a matter of about a decade, thanks to the unique advantage the psions had, which was their communication is sort of an instantaneous mental upload of everything. Not just words, but everything you feel, everything you think, everything you've experienced, all your memories, just bam, instantaneous. With that kind of advantage, the psionic people advanced through knowledge and through technology and through magic technology incredibly quickly, so that they went from being about on the level of the rest of the races to being ridiculously advanced, again, in a matter of a few years. It's also worth noting their society was basically falling apart much faster, too, as a result of this. And they got some hints that there was some groupthink problem where if you had 50 people here and 25 of them thought A and 25 of them thought B, over time, all of them would kind of gray out to agree on C. And it would just kind of naturally happen as a result of their groupthink mentality. So that led to an incredible amount of stagnation after they had reached a certain point of cultural, societal expectation and advancement and that sort of a thing. Moving further into the library, they discovered a few things. There had apparently been a tomb rock here who had been called here several years ago. Not dissimilar to what happened to the other tomb rocks, but this gentleman, he was a little bit touched in the head, and he claimed to have met God, and in so doing, that creature had taught him how to use incredible alchemical components and his mixtures and whatnot in order to animate bodies, and he had been experimenting on them more and more as of late, more or less for the fun of it. The party had to bring him down, as well as the reanimated body of the lycanthrope that they had dealt with earlier. With both of them down, they figured this was the issue, but something didn't occur to them as right. This was someone who was dabbling in alchemy, not magic. So how could he have done the things that had been done? Well, to neither of their surprise, another pair of ghostly chains appeared, bound them again, and forced the party to fight them again, along with the actual source of the chains. A young tomb rock who had forgotten his name, or, more accurately, half of a young tomb rock. They learned that centuries ago, when Mary Lascelles had been established, there had been one tomb rock who had disagreed with the deal that the tomb rocks had been given. In short, the scions had convinced the tomb rocks, whether through bribery or mental coercion or trade, to settle here on Mary Lascelles and farm it, and produce a ridiculous amount of foodstuffs and grain and crops and livestock and all that, in order to feed 4 islands. Visayan Lascelles, Mary Lascelles, Aphis Lascelles, and Erland Lascelles. All 4 of these islands were some kind of sanctuary against something that was referred to only as the Shadow. Insert Babylon 5 reference here. The party had actually heard about the concept of the shadows before. There was apparently a gentleman all the way back in Visayan Lascelles who had been experimenting with the shadows, and had experimented with a shadow, which had apparently escaped its confinement and reached Erland Lascelles, although that was the last they heard of it. So the party was kind of treating Erland Lascelles as a don't-go-to location, for obvious reasons. This tomb rock, getting back to him, had been... he did not like the idea of giving up their homelands and going to this place to farm for their masters of the scions. So he'd fought back single-handedly and actually managed to cause a tremendous amount of difficulty for the psionic masters because, you see, he was a violet mage. Of course, you don't know what that means, but suffice it to say it meant he was, to put it as simply as possible, a walking, living, magical warrior. someone who was literally magic embodied. And in so doing, he was damned powerful. It took the combined effort of the other Tomb Rocks and the Scions in order to bring him down, and even in so doing, they couldn't actually completely destroy him, so they finally managed to destroy merely his body and his mind. But his soul remained, which is still here to this day. The party tried to defeat this soul. Basically, couldn't. Not really. There was simply too much that it was doing that was beyond their capacity to defeat. But the good news is, because it had no true mind or body to keep it in such, it was effectively just lashing out at anything nearby. So with some careful trickery and some intellectual discussions, and of course a few good rolls, they managed to bypass the thing and convince the soul to go ahead and simply let go after a while. We'll see if that ever sticks. None of the parties have been back to Mary LaSalle since, with one exception. We'll get to that later. Going further in, the party did end up finding an artifact. Now, it didn't look psionic at all. It had none of the traces of psionic aesthetic design or style, but it was an artifact, and they'd been told an artifact was here, so they decided to go ahead and agree to use it. To describe it in brief, if you could imagine a sliver of obsidian stacked to another sliver, stacked to another sliver, stacked to another sliver, making this kind of rough rough knife almost of obsidian with various jabbing bits in both directions. I'm not good with descriptions. What do you want from me? That's what they were trying to deal with. Using it, they were able to readjust the Earth ley line in order to basically, if it was like this, to move it right back up to where Visay LaSalle was now, reattaching it to the island and making the island reconstruct itself as it was supposed to be. The effort in doing so was insane. Flux and Firnasil both passed out. We'll catch up with them in a moment. Meanwhile, technically, it's because the timelines here are a little bit screwy because of multiple parties, there was a group of adventurers. Now, the Adventurers Guild, which I will discuss more in a lore section, was on the way out. It had basically started falling apart and was falling on hard times and was being obsoleted, basically. There were no more frontiers. And the frontier is what causes the Adventurers Guild to really be a thing. In an urbanized modern society, there's local militia to deal with that kind of a thing. And there's local militia, and there's the mercenary, and there's the companies, and of course there's the military. There's not really a lot of a need for something like an Adventurers Guild, right? So, on its dying gasps, a bill happened to go out for a town called Al-Irat, which was in the Al-Jalima state of the Navarre Confederacy. Near the desert, not quite in it. This party, well, let's just say that it was a large party. I believe the original number was 16 people. And to be completely honest with you, I forget all of their names, because a lot of these party members decided to quit not long after, which is actually quite ordinary. Speaking of someone who's been GMing for a damned long time, it's not uncommon for people to simply lose interest very early on and bow out. They thought it might have been interesting, and it wasn't, so moving on. It's very normal. So this group was given a job to go and defeat all these horrible, horrible gnolls who had been trying to destroy all the crops, and this bill was given by a gentleman who was a guardian, an orc. Now again, I don't want to go over all the details of this, but to summarize, they were pretty sure more was going on than it seemed. They encountered some centaurs, who were of course naturally hostile, big centaurs, and wanted to kill them horribly. And they managed to injure the gnolls and also found a tribe of kobolds who was also in the area. Thankfully, they managed to not fight the gnolls and not fight the kobolds. A couple of names I want to drop here. The matriarch of this particular kobold tribe was a woman named Slavina of Dragonflayer. And the gentleman who was the leader of this particular tribe of gnolls was a man named Gnawbone of Wildpaw. Now, I say tribe. Most of these people took up their clan names, Dragonflayer and Wildpaw specifically, but they did so in reverence because both of these groups were effectively outcasts. The gnolls under Gnawbone had decided they did not want to live a life of thugs and enforcers, which is what most gnolls are used for up in the Stonehold region, so they fled south to try and find some place to make a different life for them, leading them here. The kobolds, well, they've actually been wanderers for a very long time. Not quite the same situation, but they happen to find this area as a result of a life elemental, which I won't detail the full details of, but suffice it to say that elementals, actually wandering elementals, are very, very rare. And not to spoil too much for later things, but any given elemental, the longer it's alive, well, that's the wrong way to put it. Any given elemental, the more experience it has, the more things it does, the more people it interacts with, that kind of thing, the more advanced it grows. So it grows literally larger, more sentient, more capable, more intelligent, and more powerful. Their actual power continues to grow as it was doing so. So this life elemental loved to interact with this group of the dragon flayers, and the dragon flayers were benefited by having a life elemental nearby. So it was a very mutual beneficial circumstance. As a result of the party's interactions, the life elemental expended itself in order to save them. And no, it didn't recover, for anyone wondering. They found out, after a while, that they were outmaneuvered by reasons unknown. They never actually discovered what was going on in full. Shrug. And so they decided instead to take on their next job, which in this case was to head south. They heard about some kind of a tournament which was going at some newly designed outpost, Danby's or something like that, but I'm sure that'll never come up again. So they decided to head south and take another job. Actually, they headed east first, southeast, my bad. And they found a cave where there was I think I'll call it an abomination. The best thing I could describe it as is it was a being of anti-elemental energy. Some of the party members literally had to roll will saves simply to be in its presence and not try to attack it with psychotic rage. Also in this area, they discovered a creature that some of the party members were aware of and the others weren't, called a Tusker. In brief, Tuskers are known as this incredibly savage, wild, powerful race that is occasionally seen in the Dyers, a vast, horrible, just disgusting place. Not disgusting, dangerous place, deadly. Going into the Dyers is basically signing your death warrant. But there are posts on the edges of the Dyers to make sure nothing in the Dyers reaches the rest of the continent. So there are sightings of creatures that live out there periodically, including the wonderful Grievers that tend to get asked about oh so often on my stream. So seeing a Tusker immediately put them into panic mode, and they decided to do some extremely last-ditch diplomacy and discovered, to their shock, that the Tusker actually talked. In fact, it was very eloquent, very intelligent. They learned that it was from an island called Aphes LaSalle. They learned a few other things about him, but suffice it to say, with his effort and help, they managed to unbind him and discover what was going on with the abomination thing. You see, the abomination thing was actually an experiment that had been done on a given woman, an elven woman, who was actually an adventurer, who believed that she had actually killed her husband, her lover, who was also an adventurer, while they had come to this cave. Showing her the truth managed to break the particular spell of that and allow the two to reunite. There are actually still some consequences from this action that the party has not fully seen, but suffice it to say, they were reunited. The Tusker, Ulan Tunguska, if anyone's wondering, was set free and promised that he would let everyone know about the wonderful people and their weird natures. Trying to figure out what had actually caused all these events, because this was starting to speak of conspiracy to the party, they did discover a single orc, Yellow Mage, someone who was powerful enough to cast the spell Exit, which requires heavy magic, which requires he to be at least level 8. To give you a little bit of an idea, the overall level cap, the glass ceiling for the urbanized areas of the continent, is level 10. So to give you an idea of the scale there. With that particular adventure under their belt, they were actually pretty handsomely rewarded from the funds that were found in the cave. And they decided, we'll go ahead and make something of a career of this. So they decided to go south and take another job, this time a much more long-term, more interesting job that was basically an interview into a career as members of the Order. Brief aside, the Order of Summoners is the oldest known organization on Dareth proper, not counting the Scions, of course. The Order was around prior to Year Zero, and were the ones who actually established the modern calendar, so they've been around for at least 3.5 centuries. So the Order was hiring them to deal with a rogue golem that had kind of gone wild, and let's just say that I'm amazed the party survived that golem fight and leave it at that. It was a party of something like 12 decent level adventurers, and they still had issues surviving that fight. But I only mention this to describe how difficult and powerful a golem really is, any golem. Further in, they discovered something odd. A multicolored crystal, which was hovering quietly in the air, and a lot of notes and research equipment about the crystal. Kazrinthka of Worker, an Olthoi in the party, decided to touch the crystal and immediately went insane with rage and attacked the rest of the party. They barely subdued her without, killing her. For those of you who don't know how Olthoi work, Olthoi are by their nature non-violent. The idea of actually causing harm and pain and lasting suffering to another sentient is something that's an anathema to an Olthoi. So the idea of doing this really bothered Kazrinthka, and she actually had to be convinced to stay with the party after this incident. Having dealt with the order situation, they completed their interview, and then the party spent a fairly large amount of time deciding, do we actually want to join the order? The final decision was made, after some deliberation, yes. However, first they really wanted to visit the local temple. There are, and again, I know I'm really touching on some of the lore bits in brief. That's because I want to talk about the lore in more depth in the other section. This is more just talking about the plot, right? But in brief, there are 8 elements that govern the way this world works. Indeed, that's true throughout the entirety of the Imperium, actually. And yes, Primus is in the Imperium. It has a kind of an important role in the overall story. Moving on. There are 8 temples across Dareth, one of which one for each of the elements, one that manifests in them. The party overall has only visited, I think, 4 of them as of now, so I've only really described 4 of them. Each one has some similarities. It is almost impossible to do harm to another, and I don't just mean physically. When you are in the presence of a temple, it has what is effectively a peace field going on around it. So they tend to be sanctuary zones. That's very important right now, where we're at in the story now, with the war going on. More on that later. But there's also a bit of a society that's grown up. I shouldn't say society, more of a culture thing around, because there's always a town that has grown up around the base of the temple with people who trade or talk or discuss or just like to interact with each other. Huge confluences of commerce and ideas and science and knowledge and friendship and all that fun stuff. And of course, then there's the temples themselves. Simply reaching most of the temples is usually something of an ordeal. Usually not too bad, but some people find themselves basically incapable of doing it. I'll describe why, to give you an example, when I talk about the Spatial temple, the one that they wanted to go to for this time. But once you're in the temple, you also can undergo a trial. The way the trials work, in brief, is once you interact with the object that is the focal point of the temple, you are basically transported into your own private reality, is probably the best way to put this. You're not literally transported. It is all metaphysical. It's all in your head. However, it feels 100% real, and your memory is actually rewritten to accommodate it. For example, let's say you go into a trial and you fast forward 20 years. You have memories of the last 20 years of all of that happened. And the party probably hasn't actually figured this out yet, but what happens in the trial and the way that the world is formed has something to do with the actual person's personality and their mindset and their outlook and the way they think of things. Each trial is designed to engender a specific response within people, to pass or fail the trial, in other words, hence why it's called a trial. And the given ones are all trying to reach for certain ideals. No one's 100% certain why the temples exist or why the trials exist. They've all been around since before year 0, so nobody really has any information on them. It is believed by the party and those who know about the Scions and the history of the world before year 0 that the temples were around before even the Scions were, so no one's really 100% sure why they have these trials or why there's these, trying to live up to certain types of personalities or mindsets or whatever. Regardless, once you undergo a trial, again, it can take any period of time. Some trials have actually literally taken weeks of time. But when you leave, only a second has passed. The Spatial the Spatial temple is twofold. There's a massive tower, very artificial looking, very constructed. Inside is constant clanging of massive gears and machinery. And when you get to the very top of that massive tower, almost a kilometer in the air, there is a nearly transparent glass staircase that leads out to what looks like a massive spired crystalline rift in space. If you were looking at it, you actually can't see any texture on it. There's nothing there to reflect. There's nothing there to indicate something that is there, merely the absence of something that is there. And if you were staring at it, you feel like you're looking out into space directly. Once you're inside the spatial temple, it's as if you were standing in the center of the planet. So any direction you look, you're actually looking out at the stars without light pollution, if you know what that means. If you don't, I strongly recommend you go Google image search right now, stars without light pollution. You can see what the night sky really looks like. It is fantastic. Moving on. So the party goes here. Some of them go through the trial, some of them don't. They get a few, souvenirs. Some people hang out, everyone just chats. It's a nice little event. And after doing so, there was there was actually some trauma with regards to several of the party members, especially poor Rory and Snarg. But regardless, having gone through the trial, it's like, okay, now we have to follow through on our mission with the Order, which is to go north to a town named Alcorinth, I believe. I don't remember that one exactly, because it was basically just a stop on the way. Once they got there, they found a woman. Now, I'm going to pause for a moment. At this point in time, the party has shrunk in size considerably. So I'm going to name the major players at this point, the people who are not about to leave the party. Because a few people stayed on for a few more sessions, such as Tabra and Sethos and Araiguna, but they would then shortly leave the campaign. So the primary characters at this point, and we will do a video talking about them in the future, is Rory, a human, the gentleman who was basically kidnapped from Vassain-Lascelles by some brigands and ending up the ship crashed. The ship was not structurally sound because it didn't have to be. It was from Vassain-Lascelles. Nothing there has to be structurally sound. You put a brick on top of two other bricks and boom, you got a house, right? A lot of the structures fell apart when the ley line was separated as well. So the ship sank. Rory, by sheer happenstance, managed to make his way to the mainland of the continent, and the rest is history, as they say. He is a barbarian, and he's had some issues learning the unusual ways of this new continent. Then there is Higaide, another human. I already mentioned him. He is a monk. He's also Batman, and he trained under a master, and by master I mean someone who was level 3 or 4 on Vassain-Lascelles, but he was basically the best monk on Vassain-Lascelles, and had been so for many, many, many years. Higaide tries to follow his own moral compass. He's got some own issues. Again, we'll talk about that later. There is Zeiss, probably the one most of my viewers are going to recognize most clearly because his actual username on Twitch is Zeiss. Zeiss is an elf, a former assassin from the Bloodied Flock, which in summary is legalized assassinations. He decided to leave that group during the campaign in order to pursue his own ends, which have changed and formed a bit as time goes on. We also have Javan. Again, someone you might recognize from my stream. Javan is a fairy. I'm not going to talk about fairies in too much detail, but they don't have clan names, and they don't have some of the other features that other races do. But he's not like this. He's a full 6 feet tall. He does have wings, and he's very, very young. I believe he's something like 5 years old, I want to say. Pretty young, and it's okay, he's still fully an adult. That's the way fairies are born. But he wanted to pursue his own, martial, and so he kind of left the area of the nation-state of Arwick, because most of the fairies work for an organization that's entirely dedicated towards peace, diplomacy, negotiation, trade, all that boring stuff that Javan just didn't want to deal with. So he went out and got a spear and was like, dreamed of being a dragoon. Let's see. And then we have, of course, Snarg of Wildpaw. He is actually a pseudo-newcomer to the group after a Sclavi named Whiskor decided to go off to pursue his own ends and totally didn't end up with the Directorate. And Snarg was basically assigned to the group on behalf of Gnawbone of Wildpaw with a twofold mission. One, to try and help them out, obvious, and 2, to try and find a new home for the Wildpaw. That kind of went around south, but again. There's also Guido of Granite Holm. He's a Lugian, a giant. It's actually funny. I've never really stated this out loud, but Guido, the character, is basically a midget amongst Lugians. He is very short and very small for Lugian standards. Most Lugians are damned huge. This is something I did as an intentional thing. Anyone wanting to play a Lugian is going to be someone who is very much on the small side of the thing, unless they can make a convincing argument to play a full-size Lugian who is gigantic. So Guido of Granitholm, he's obviously from the Osteth Republic, a paladin of life, and that is his thing, what he follows, because no deities or anything like that to worry about. But his ideology is the element of life itself. So his adherence to doing good and helping others is pretty obvious. And then there's Coulson, who is a fascinating individual, because Coulson, again, I don't want to talk too much about him in detail, but Coulson is one of the only people who bothered to not have a clan name. This has actually come up recently. And he's an elf, by the way. I should say that he is an elf gentleman, and has a really simple mindset. He's the kind of guy who would literally just want to settle in, make a furniture shop, that kind of a thing. He just kind of ended up into adventuring as a way to kind of get some initial capital for going back and settling, and he's just kind of been dragged along as events get more and more horrible and things escalate around him. He's a nice guy, though. He's a red mage, by the way. I believe that's every one of the major players, except for the one that they just met at Alcorinth. A person who they didn't even know the gender of at first, named Z. Z has a bit of a complicated history and backstory. I'll go ahead and tell you now, it's a she, and Z is an elf, they think. And Z has actually been working with the Order and the Undermarket for several years. Again, I'm tossing all these names at you, and I apologize. The Undermarket, in short, is basically the name for the overall underworld organization, all the illegal stuff, smuggling and gambling and all that fun stuff. No slavery, because this is my world, and screw that. There is a little bit of a drug trade. There's basically one drug, and it's actually incredibly deleterious. It's kind of popular, though, believe it or not. Lace Slice, that'll actually come up later. Anyway, so they meet this contact, Z. Z is a black mage, by the way. As they're going through Alcorinth, they discover a few things. First of all, there's a few weird, just non-consistent facts that they come across that feel like someone's trying to lead them off of a trail. And they discover a Burun. I will not describe the Burun race in whole, but in summary, the Burun are the ruling race of the Show Empire. That's the best way I can describe them in short. Large, powerful, long-lived, intelligent, very adept at magic, etc., etc. Somewhat amphibian in overall styling. So this Burun decided to completely surrender to the group. Yes, I will do whatever it is you want. And then they went north to meet with a colonel of the Neveri military who arrived in a completely prototype, new type of airship that they developed, which was actually a sand ship. This ship could actually move fluidly through physical matter, effectively a stealth airship, because as it moves through, the matter replaces itself as if it was never moved. So it's not actually literally tunneling through the Earth. It's magically displacing it and then replacing it as it goes by. An incredibly advanced machine, and again, effectively a stealth airship. To rewind a moment, airships are a very new invention of only the last 20 years or so, so they're very new. For the most part, only the military tends to have some. There are very, very few commonplace, merchant kings that tend to have airships, and a few merchant cargo ships, that kind of thing. It's just started becoming more and more commonplace. At this point, I would call it rare, as opposed to extremely rare. It's now down to rare, and it's working on getting down to uncommon. But military airships are death machines. They can do a lot. They have extremely powerful scanners. They have pretty powerful armor, and they can probably take out most towns by themselves. And of course, they're airships and all the advantages that implies of just being able to sit overhead and blast down. Moving on. So this sand ship that takes the prisoner away towards one of the forts to the north, and like, okay, yes. They go ahead and head to the fort as well. I don't remember their exact reasoning, but it's okay, because once they arrived, they found the fort destroyed. The entire fort was reportedly destroyed by the Burun in question that I just mentioned. He did it with some kind of strange black and red lightning. That's all they could talk about it. And it literally tore the entire fort in half. Caused, just massive blast through the place. Very few survivors. Having no idea what to make of that, the party literally fled south, trying to make heads or tails of what the hell's been going on. And they found a woman literally on the road in front of them. Rory and Hagaide actually recognized this woman because she was very famous on Vassain-Lefsel for being one of the most powerful mages on the island. That would be a level 1 mage, by the way. Actually, a scion, but whatever. Regardless, it's Firnasil. No flux, just Firnasil. They recognize her. It takes them a moment to figure out what the hell's going on, and they finally determine that nobody has any idea what's going on. So they decide to keep going on as they were previously going to. They reach the next town, head north, and finally arrive at the capital of Al-Jalima, the actual city Al-Jalima. Brief aside, there are several cities referred to as major cities across Dareth. Each of these major cities has been around since before Year Zero, and each of them has three features that are distinct to them. One, something called the Wall. Each one has what is effectively a mobile wall constructed of materials that is appropriate for the particular region or area. For example, lots of sandstone around Al-Jalima and rock and that kind of thing. And the wall will naturally expand outwards, and in some cases upwards, to accommodate increased residency, increased need. No one's been able to figure out how to control the walls. In fact, sometimes the walls will actually shrink as populations shrink as well, crushing, in some cases, houses and buildings as they go. But attempts have been made to try and trick the walls, which have always failed. The walls always seem to know exactly how large they need to be, by whatever definition that is. The second defining trait of a major city is the fact that there is a hub in a major city. This hub is a form of instantaneous travel between other hubs. It's basically a large floating crystal, and I mean huge. We're talking like building-sized crystal that you can use and immediately teleport to any of the other hubs on the network, right? So instantaneous travel across the continent, very useful. A little bit limited because it's basically one person or group or whatever at a time. So if you have a cart of stuff, you can transport items. You can transport the cart through, but you and then the cart. You see how that works? The hub has been reverse engineered how to make it function by, well, a fairly large number of people, but it's most often attributed to the mites in general. There's no organization of mites, so most people just say the mites. And there are a large group of mites and gnomes and Lugians who basically run the hub and retain a decent amount of fees for doing so. You have to pay to use it. And that helps keep the whole organization going, keeping them fed and otherwise happy. Also helps maintain security around the hubs for reasons that should be fairly obvious. Although threatening someone threatening someone at the hub is basically suicide. I don't mean literally, because they're not going to kill you. They don't have to. But you cannot use that crystal until they use it on you. It's not like you touch the crystal and anything happens. They do a specific process and then they teleport you with the crystal. If you threaten a mite, you have just lost your hub privileges. Congrats. So you can see how the pseudo peace has been maintained around that because of the threat that they quietly hold. And I forget the third thing about a major city. Oh, I guess the third thing is the fact that all these cities have been around since before Year Zero. That would be the third aspect. So Al-Jalima is one of the major cities, formerly Jalima. I'll talk about the significance of the Al thing when we talk about the Nevaria Confederacy. Al-Jalima is the university capital, massive amounts of studies, places of learning, that kind of thing. Most of the major academies in the entire continent, are here at Al-Jalima. They arrive to find out that war has been declared. Now, this is interesting, and I spent a while building this up, both when the campaign was actually live and when I talked about this on the blog. Because until this point in time, the war has never actually been. It's never happened. There have been fights, there have been skirmishes, but the vast majority of military action has always been against bandits, or pirates, or enemies, or centaurs, or monsters, or God knows what else, right? The idea of a nation fighting another nation had never come into being. Part of that's because of the Deconstruct Accords, which we'll talk about later when we get to the lore stuff, but The party comes here, finds out war has been declared, and it's just throwing everyone for a loop. Nobody has any what to do. Anybody what to do. Nobody has. There's just panic in the streets. People are in some cases are literally rioting, and by rioting I mean peaceful rioting. There's widespread panic. There's food shortages. There's kind of an economic crisis, and this is all just in one city, by the way. The way the war leans is this. There had been hostilities building and building and building between the Navaric Confederacy and the Show Empire. So naturally, the war is actually between the Show Empire, the Navaric Confederacy, who have allied against Stonehold. I'm going to go and let you in on a little secret. Stonehold isn't a nation. Stonehold is an area, a region. It's actually the name of a city as well, which hence giving the name to Stoneholders in the whole region. But there's no cohesive government up there. There's no cohesive borders or military or organization whatsoever. It's just a huge area of independent little villages and tribes and clans of many different races. Mosswarts, gnolls, kobolds, drudges, goblins, centaurs, and I feel like I'm missing a few. Quite a few, in other words. So they declare war on, like, I don't even have a real-life equivalent. They declare war on a chunk of area that happens to be up there, and have sent massive numbers of forces up there, and nobody has any idea what to do with this. Not too long after this, Alluvia is actually going to be declaring war on them as well, thus making an actual nation fighting another nation a real thing. That's one of the major plot arcs that's going on right now. The party, of course, doesn't want to have anything to do with any of this. They're like, no, let's just get the hell out of here, okay? And so they try to negotiate some way to get their ends meet, and they have to follow a favor. And in so doing, they have to do one of the quests that I feel was probably the best quest I've given my parties across all the different campaigns thus far. They had to go north to a town whose name has escaped me, and try to motivate the son of the governor, Governor Toltorn of Amani, by the way. That's an important name because he's been a pretty important NPC so far. He is the governor of the Al-Jalima state. He's got a brain on his head. But his son, excuse me, I'm saying this wrong, the distributor's son, totally different guy. The distributor of the Far Reach region of Navari, his son has not really been doing that well. And the way Navari politics work, it's more or less a total democracy combined with a total tyranny. It's kind of strange. Again, I'll talk about that in the Navari section. So he's concerned that his son is going to lose his mayorship. So he sends the party north to, motivate the son. They get there, and it becomes extremely clear, extremely quickly, that the son is up to something. There is something going on, and they keep finding more and more hints of a conspiracy, and they kind of turn it into a witch hunt, and Rory threatens some secretaries, because that's what he's best at. He has done this several times up until this point in time. But when they get to the root of things, they discover the horrid, horrid truth. Yes, the mayor in question, the troll here, has been having a secret affair with a woman who works there, but that's not actually the secret. The secret is the two of them already have a child, a very young child, only a couple years old. And the child is a desolate. Desolation is probably the single biggest theme of Primus, at least as far as its overall story construction. I can describe desolates in brief, even though there's a lot to talk about it. So here's a brief synopsis for those of you who, again, have no idea what Primus is. If you are a desolate, it means you are composed of anti-elemental energies. Now, you still have a trace amount of elementalism in you. That's how you are still defined, as what kind of desolate you are, and that can lead to other forms of desolation, which we won't go into here. But suffice it to say that it forces a magical affliction upon you, okay? It means that anyone who identifies you can hate you. And I say can, because sometimes they have no reason behind it. Sometimes they look at you and they don't understand that you are a desolate. See, because it's like this. Let's say you are a desolate and I look at you. And in game terms, I roll a will save. But this is actually what happens in lore as well, in character. I look at you and I have to resist your desolation. If I resist it, then nothing happens at all. No issues, no complications whatsoever. I don't even notice anything's different. But every time I interact with you, it's another will save. Every single time. Now, there are reports that desolation's been around for many, many years, and people have just been getting lucky. Not to give too much away, but as we learned, desolation's been away for a lot. Desolation's been around for a lot longer than 30 years. The first known occurrence of desolation being discovered was, I believe, about 40 years prior to that. I came up with an exact timeline, forgive me, where a gentleman had been the mayor of a town. He was like 30, 40 years old, and he was a desolate, born that way. And one day a fairy showed up, looked at him, and immediately identified him as a desolate. Fairies, you see, can automatically, as literally it's part of their vision, they see on the elemental spectrum. So a fairy can identify a desolate immediately. But again, you don't hate someone because they're a desolate. Your mind invents a reason to hate them. That's how desolation works. So it can be attributed to things like racism, or sexism, or nationalism, or tribalism, or simply psychotic rage in some cases. But the thing actually affecting you is you being affected by their desolation. Make sense? Desolation comes with a few benefits. They have something that they can do called a translation, which is effectively a teleport. It has some limitations. I'm not going to share that here. And they also they kind of interact with some of the rules of the way reality works a little bit differently due to their nature. But obviously those benefits barely outweigh the defects of basically not being able to interact with anyone without fear. Again, I'll talk more about desolates later. It's a big topic. The point is, this child, between these two people, who are not desolates, by the way, was a desolate child. That child was very lucky. Sometimes a child's parents, even when they're very, very young, will, force the child out, sometimes onto the porch, sometimes onto the street, sometimes out of the town, because of the desolation. You could probably also see one of the reasons why reports of desolation didn't really happen in older times. There was a gentleman there, a gnome. I forget his exact name. Forgive me. It's like Wizzle of Great Gear or something like that. But anyways, it's a gnome who's actually world-renowned for being an expert on desolation. And he is there trying to basically figure out a way to mask the child's desolation so she can live a normal life. And this is what the whole conspiracy is that the party has worked so hard to uncover. Then they were so certain there was some kind of evil force here. And this is what they found. The party ended up giving a bit of a collection to the group in order to help fund the research for the child, and ended up sending them to the town of Collier, the city of Collier, because drudges are resistant to desolation, as are mites, as are, I guess that's actually it. Ulthoi are immune to desolation, by the way. Having accomplished this wonderful, wonderful thing, the party this whole time has been a little bit paranoid because they've been believing someone's been following them. And they thought it had to do with whatever conspiracy was in town, but obviously that is no longer the case. And the fact that they are still being followed has put them on edge. As they are traveling east towards the capital hub of the Order, the city of Eldritch, they are absconded upon by a creature that they eventually start calling the Nightmare. The Nightmare looks like a somewhat smaller and more horrifying version of a Griever. Lots of claws, lots of sharp, lots of spikes. And it moves very, very quickly, attacks and seemingly kills Kazrinthka of Worker, the Ulthoi I mentioned earlier, and takes off with her. The party chases after him and covers this unusual warped area where literally they started seeing things like memories and impressions and just horrible, strange things. And the party barely muddles their way through this thing and finds a situation where they refuse to kill a young child, an elf, who they learn is actually a desolate. The party goes ahead and helps this elf, whose name is Andre, by the way. Try to remember that. Because it'll be important someday, I swear. They help this Andre kid in ways that are kind of weird. Here's what happens. After they leave the area, they find that they have been translated a great deal of distance. They are all the way on the eastern coast, which, for a bit of perspective, is kind of like transporting... well, I guess I'll just say it. It's like 2,000 miles. It's a big old distance. Deciding that the best possible path now would be to go north to the city of Holtburg, the party heads north, and they encounter a robed energy being, which calls itself the Watcher, I believe, was the specific title. Someone who claims to be a representative of a group called the 11, which has been an extremely controversial group amongst the party, especially since they're still interacting with the party even in the modern time. The 11 approach the group bluntly, state that Zeiss and others like him are part of the problem, without bothering to elaborate, but eventually are talked into being willing to try and help because one of the party members, one of the ones who actually ends up leaving the party, ironically, got their attention. And so they are willing to at least bargain and try to help out if the party can prove that they are in line with the 11's ideals. As part of this, they send something called a Sotiris, which is a sentient golem, basically, to go, which has the ability to teleport at will, to go grab Andre, the elf child from before, and take him to safety. They then head east in order to try and make their way north to Holtberg and find a group, a hidden cove for a group called the Black Brine, which is a group of bandits. Now, to define something really quick, bandits in this setting are much less horrible than they are in most other settings. If you're thinking bandit, someone who is looting and pillaging and raping and all that horrible stuff, that's a pirate. Someone who is basically declared by law to be free game. You can do whatever you want to them. No laws protect them. Screw them. It's why pirates tend to be short-lived in this setting. A bandit, by contrast, they'll rob you, but they'll go out of their way not to hurt you. And they usually try not to rob you too much because they know if they rob you too much, they might be labeled pirates, and then they might be screwed. In an era where airships exist, it's kind of a thing where you want to not gather too much attention to yourself, right? So the Black Brine usually deal with more mundane crimes. Smuggling is a big deal, for example. And they were a naval power, as you might imagine by the title, and operated all along the eastern coast. The Black Brine agree at length, after some negotiation, to go ahead and ferry the party north into Holtberg. No problems there, giving them some false visas, all that sort of thing. They learn a little bit about a threat, which I've mentioned briefly before, the unknowable, horrible power that is the Tumarok, who 30 years ago showed up out of nowhere, conquered a colossal chunk of land, and then stopped in the space of about 3 days. To this day, no one's really entirely certain what a Tumarok is, or what they look like, or what they wanted, or really anything about them at all, other than the fact that they just crushed everything. That invasion was the impetus for the creation of the airship project, for example, among many others. It also led to the allegiance between the Eluvian Kingdom and the Osteth Republic. Again, I'm getting too much into lore, just giving you a little bit of backstory. So they head to Holtberg, and they spend a ridiculously large amount of time in real-time adventuring there, which is no surprise. I'm going to skip over all that. Zeiss gets captured. Zeiss gets rescued. The party gets claimed officially allied with the Lord of Holtberg, the Lady Lightmane. And as a result of that, let's just say that little spark of them allying themselves and the coordination they made with the Lord of Holtberg is pretty much one of the biggest reasons why Alluvia decided to go ahead and declare war on Nevere. So the party heads north after that. They do a little bit of exploring in some of the local towns, and they find several things. I'm trying to think of the exact order, because a lot of these events happen in kind of a blur, but they encounter a group of people who don't use magic or magic technology, but pure technology, very high advanced technology. This technology can encourage people to be loyal, and, well, let's just say that this coincides with a major event called the Assassination of the Undermarket. Someone somewhere arranged for assassins to move through virtually every town in the entire continent simultaneously and kill off most of the middle management that had been running the Undermarket, effectively killing the Undermarket. They timed this with the announcement of the war assault that happened several days prior to this event, when Nevere and Sho allied against Stonehold, in order to make it look like Stonehold was the capital of the Undermarket, which everyone just kind of had been assuming for many years. I mean, those dirty Stoneholders and their uncivilized ways, of course that's where the Undermarket comes from, right? By the way, there's a bit of a cultural divide between the civilized races of the Four Nations and the uncivilized races of the Stoneholders. Moving on. With this assassination, though, the party uncovers that it was a very specific and very precise assassination due to literally sheer luck. They encounter an elf, who some of my party members will remember as Fat Elf, because elves are not Lord of the Rings elves in this setting. They're basically just people with pointy ears. And this gentleman, by sheer luck, survived the assassination attempt and holed up in a town where a lot of these agents were trying to go ahead and find him and kill him. They also encountered a centaur woman who was actually not trying to kill everyone on sight, named Trinarin. I forget her clan name, forgive me. But Trinarin is actually a holdover because she was actually another player character for an extremely brief campaign. Only lasted like 3 sessions. But she is the head of this new organization called the Free Trade League, which is trying to oppose the Provincial Trade Company. I don't want to get too much into that. But she ended up here by accident and is coordinating with the local militia in order to try and defend this poor gentleman from the assassins, who also happen to have a fully fledged frigate, not an airship, an actual ship, naval ship, in order to kill him. The party stumbles into this, helps defeat them, and a couple of things happen. First of all, Zeiss had been carrying around this device ever since all the way back in their second adventure. Remember in that town where they found the cave with the Tusker and the Abomination? Zeiss had found a sliver of a mirror there. And every now and again it would talk to him, just every so often. Most of the time it would try to tempt him into things. And for some reason, Zeiss didn't want to give in to that. Well, Zeiss, seeing this massive frigate of lots of people and worrying about their chances of taking it down, arranged for the sliver of mirror to be flung onto the deck, where it sucked everyone on board into it and then vanished. That's another thing whose consequences have not been fully felt yet, but trust me, they will be. The second thing that was a major event of this is they discovered a name for this organization that had assassinated all these people. They had no cause or understanding of what this name meant, but the name is the Viosians. Having accomplished all this, the party then headed further north and found something very unusual. There was a dwarven town which was having its own private problems. I won't bore you with them. Basically, they were trying to live off of the quarry and couldn't, and then they uncovered some kind of a thing, and it turns out that it responded to a scion. Remember, Fiona Steele's in the party at this point in time. And so when they went in, it turned out to be a massive military scion facility, which actually housed it's not actually a military-grade ship. It's a basic, mundane, like a light cruiser of the Scions. Big old ship called the Skyclaw. And the party spent quite some time trying to debate what to do with the Skyclaw and learning about it. And learning about some horrible things about it, too, including a little device called a Tusker Mine, which was created by some gentleman, some insane brain genius amongst the Scions, who apparently had invented this device that would kind of turn you into a were-tusker. In other words, anytime you either lost control or reverted control, you could be turned into a tusker form. You'd be small by tusker standards. But the idea here was that they were going to deploy these mines against all of the servitor races, the Scions were going to do this, in order to use them as tusker fodder against their enemy, which they referred to as the Shadow. Even in the logs they uncover, it is mentioned that the odds of this actually succeeding against their enemy were non-existent. But they were desperate, and it's not like the servitor races have any other purpose, right? So they were willing to fling wave after wave of the lesser races in order to try and stall the Shadow threat. Rory, I keep mentioning that name, Rory got infected by one of these mines and has yet to been cured. As a kind of a curious consequence of how this particular form of weaving happened. I haven't talked about weaving yet. Basically, Rory's soul has been rewoven so that whenever he shifts into Tusker form, it's still his soul. It's just his soul differently. I know that sounds weird, but imagine you have a ball of sand and you make like a sandcastle out of it. And then you get rid of the sandcastle and you turn it into like a little stadium or whatever, right? It's the same sand. You're using the same construction materials, but you're making something different out of it. That's what the Tusker form is, who became known as Thog, because over time, as he slowly interacted with them more and woke up more, he started to develop personality and sentience and sapience, completely separate from Rory's. So that's kind of still an issue between the two of them. They also encountered several NPCs who, long story short, there was a bit of a scuffle because Araiguna insulted them and caused them to get into a fight over the airship, and they accidentally kind of killed a few of them, and that led to a big old mess where Snarg had to actually go on trial for Araiguna being a murderer. It was a big old mess. I'm just going to skip through all that. Suffice it to say that there are still consequences from that event as well, including one name I want to drop at you for right now, Scargill of Pallidtone. He's a Moorsman, and he's a Fell Knight, and he is an experienced and skilled veteran adventurer, and he's also the only one who actually survived that particular encounter. So keep that in mind, and keep that name in the back of your mind somewhere. Having done all these many adventures, which took quite some time, they finally encounter another agent of the 11, who has finally gotten back to them and said, "Y'all are crazy." He informs them that they are chaotic and incohesive, and because of the fact that they are just another symptom of the problem that exists in the world, the 11 will not be supporting them. However, in order to make good on the promise they made some time ago, they will offer one boon to the party, and it turns out that they have the capacity to teleport them straight to Aphis Lacelle. Why would they want to go to Aphis Lacelle? Well, not too long before this, the fire ley line exploded. I haven't talked about the ley lines exploding that much because most of this story was from the perspective of people who didn't feel it. Remember I mentioned all the way back how Vissain Lacelle had been unveiled to the world? Well, when that happened, a massive wave of Earth elemental energy just shot out. Now, this Earth elemental energy had a lot of really long-reaching problems. There's a frog on my window. I thought that was a moth at first. This caused a lot of long-reaching issues, and as well, some of them, the party I don't think is even fully aware of them yet. But it literally was a physical wave. You can see it. It caused a lot of damage. Anybody who had been in the middle of using magic or weaving while it hit, it kind of went wrong. And it caused quite a bit of a panic because this kind of thing had literally never happened before. And you can't really avoid feeling that because it hit the whole continent in, bit by bit. Well, not too long after that, in fact, 2 days after that, the water ley line, the one around Mary Lacelle, was detonated. Now, the party so far in each of these two has discovered that the Red Cloak gentleman I mentioned earlier had been basically murdering the scions who had been in the facilities in each of these islands, and that murder is apparently the thing that has been causing these ley lines to detonate. So as they're doing all these events, the fire ley line detonates. And they know that it's on Aphis Lacelle, and they feel like since it just happened, they might have a chance to actually catch him. So they head to Aphis Lacelle with the aid of the 11. They also tell the 11 to piss off because they hate them. This leads to the Aphis Lacelle adventures, which I'm going to run through in brief. What they discover is Aphis Lacelle is an extremely dangerous, exotic land which is more settled underground than above ground, and is inhabited entirely by two races, Tuskers and humans. Both of these races are very advanced technologically and have an almost total lack of understanding of magic. They tend to refer to things that are magical as a form of technology. They also have an inherent terror, which has been bred into them and taught to them across the generations of scions. So when they discover that Firnacil is amongst them, they completely flip out. And the party tries to negotiate with them or calm them down and inform them that she's not a threat. They never actually succeed. At one point in time, Firnacil herself gets really sick of all this and just mentally dominates everyone around her. Not the party. All the humans, all the Tuskers, just like that, no effort. This is when they discover an interesting little fact. Tuskers and humans specifically are bred to be more susceptible to psionic mind control than any other race. In game terms, the DC, if you are a human or a Tusker, to avoid being mind controlled, is tripled. After this little display, they finally kind of talk her down and arrange a situation where, okay, we're going to go check out this place where we believe the source of the problems are, and then we'll be out of your hair, okay? And the best way that they could describe this is they describe to them that there's a rogue scion, the red cloak gentleman, and their scion is fighting against him, and so the human delegator is like, okay, so you've got infighting, got it. Can you take it off my island, please? As an aside, to give you an idea of how advanced these people are, they were working on spaceflight. They weren't there yet, but they were working the math out and the engineering structural requirements of that. Also, Aphos Lacelle is actually technically 2 islands, and it is huge, as it needs to be for an island of Tuskers and humans. They make their way through the psionic facility that has actually being guarded by a single titanium golem, is what they call it. Very crude looking, very boxy. Looks like a child made it. And yet, as the party's looking at it, they're just, this seems wrong. Now, the Tuskers and the humans who are there are like, we'll deal with this. They've got, heavy automatic rifles and, modern technology, right? So they've got this. They go out there and they get completely slaughtered. The device, the titanium golem, uses a singular weapon that blasts black and red lightning. And this blast completely devastates the group. It's only by sheer happenstance they manage to damage the thing, and when they do, it self-destructs, which also happens to blow a hole into the facility for the party to enter. Once they enter the facility, they find it to be literally reality warping. They look like they're in a massive field, which has grass in all directions, and then there's this single platform, and then there's these bunnies. A lot of little things. I don't want to go over all the details. Suffice it to say, the entire temple had been restructured to test Firnecil as she was going through it. At the end of it, they discover that the Red Cloak, had actually destroyed all of the tubes here in a hurry, and had been doing so for some purpose. They also get his name, which is why I go ahead and drop it now. The name of Red Cloak, the person they've been chasing this entire time since the first island, is Gerlin. When they leave this place, they end up all the way down near the air temple. They go ahead and take the air trial while they are there, and do a few other adventures. I'm sorry, I'm kind of skipping over the details because, for example, I could tell you all about the Gerlins coins and how they tried to sell them into usage by one of the piracy groups, the Reds. I could tell you all about how they had to get those back. I could tell you about the grits. I could tell you about the actual trials in the air temple. I don't mind describing the air temple. The air temple, if you could imagine a massive lake, except there's no water in it, of course. It's just a hole in the earth, and if you look down, you just see the sky. You see the clouds down there. And you walk out onto it, and it's solid up until you get a certain point out, and then you just plummet. But the thing that's cool is you never stop plummeting, but after a while you start to realize you're in the air temple, constantly falling. The air temple is just all these people who are in a perpetual state of falling forever. And whenever you want to leave the air temple, you just kind of will yourself to leave, and you find yourself back up on the sky lake, right? Some of the party members found this terrifying for some reason, walking out amongst a massive sky. I can't imagine why. Either way. They undergo the air trial. Some of those air trials lasted quite some time. Head back, and at this point in time, things start to go south. 2 major events happen. First of all, they go to a town which is under attack by one of the local blocks. Blocks are going to be important somewhat soon, although they've already kind of started falling apart. Basically, after the Undermarket fell apart, a lot of people started naming themselves warlords and taking over a chunk of what's left of the Undermarket to fill the hole, the political and economic vacuum, right? These are called blocks, B-L-O-C. The party has actually been establishing their own block, which they call the Exchange, with the help of 2 individuals, Ogren, a dwarf, and Bonebreaker, a ogre. And the 2 of them have been helping to run this exchange, which was going to become the block for the Holdberg area. And they had a fair number of adventures of trying to take down competing blocks and other bandit groups in the region, which, again, I won't bore you with too many of the details of. Suffice it to say, they go to this town, try to defeat the block there, and they find an individual, a Lord Elf, who is interesting for two reasons. Number one, most of the people recognize him because he is Radnal of High Spring. He's a dragoon, and he's one of the old military generals of the Illuvian Kingdom, back when the Illuvian Kingdom was formed a century ago. He also recognizes Fear Nasil as a scion on sight. Keep in mind, nobody knows what a scion is other than the actual party. Simply being able to recognize a scion, let alone know the name scion, is unusual. He ends up fighting the group. Things go really bad. Fear Nasil starts kind of losing it, and the entire town is destroyed. Yes, the entire town is debris all the way down to the ground. It was very nearly worse than that, actually. Not too long after this, some unusual airships show up. They claim to be from an organization called the Pinnacle. Now, I haven't mentioned this to you yet, but that nightmare creature, the one that killed Kazrinthka of Ulthoi, or excuse me, Kazrinthka of Worker, the Ulthoi, it claimed to be of the Pinnacle. And that was the only thing it would say about their ends. It would said, "I am from the Pinnacle, and we seek discord," and that's all it told them. Or I guess it's just he. It's all he told them. So the airship shows up, and they claim to be from the Pinnacle. Don't worry, we're here to help. The party freaks out. And in short order, the party finds out that the Pinnacle has access to the hidden spell Phoenix. White mages in my setting have access at the highest level to a spell called Phoenix, which actually resurrects the dead. There's a spell earlier called Raise or Life or whatever, which brings someone back from downed back to life, but that downed is not dead. Downed is, unconscious or bleeding out or whatever. Dead is dead. Phoenix can bring someone back even if they are nothing but ash, right? So they start casting Phoenix en masse, rezzing all the people who died in this town. Now the thing is, it is a hidden spell for a reason. If knowledge of that kind of a spell got out, it would be chaos, politically, culturally, religiously. So the Pinnacle goes around and starts mind-wiping everyone, completely erasing everyone's minds, and replacing them with other memories. If not for incredibly clever circumstance, the party would have no knowledge of this. However, Fear Nasil, who is a scion, basically has all the memories and perspectives from Snarg dumped into her, so that when they get back out of it, and when she comes out of it, she can then recite those memories back to them, thanks to her psionic mind speak. So they have Snarg's memories, all of them do, of this particular event, and that's it. That's how they know this event happened. The next major event that happened is they go back towards the Spurka, it's not called that yet, the Skyclaw, the airship I mentioned, and they discover that it is swarming with Ulthoi, who have basically taken ownership of it, for lack of a better term to put it. The Ulthoi and the Order both. There's a lot of political hand-wringing that goes on in this, but basically the party insists, no, this is our airship. And neither the Ulthoi nor the Order seem to see it that way. For some strange reason, they don't acknowledge the time-honored tradition of dibs. Instead, what happens is a Navari airship claiming to be of an organization called the Directorate shows up. They don't claim that, but the party recognizes them as Directorate. This airship shows up and ends up engaging in combat against an Illuvian airship. Now, I just got to mention two things really quick. First of all, right before that battle happened, the Kazrinthka of Worker and Fear Nasil and a gentleman named Ricard, I'll talk about him in just a moment, ended up going onto the airship and taking off and flying off in a test cruise because they needed someone like Fear Nasil to help run the thing. I want to mention Ricard really quick, too. Ricard is someone who was assigned to the party some time ago, the first time they went to Holberg, actually. He showed up and offered to be a liaison of a woman he referred to as Airfall, a.k.a. of the House of Airfall, from the Derecost, who I haven't mentioned yet. But I mentioned the Derecost Accords earlier. The Derecost are what most people refer to as the Ancients of the group. They're the older, the stronger. They actually live in the Dyers, to give you an idea. So he offered his support to them and has basically been assigned to the group. But in truth, it's a little more accurate to say he's assigned to Fear Nasil. Apparently, she is considered a valuable and dangerous asset, so he is in charge of that. He is very clever, very intelligent. He is an incredible weaver, and he's a powerful yellow mage. So he's been a bit of an asset to the group. He also just kind of blends into the background a bit to the point where some of the people don't even notice he's there. So Rikarg, Firnasil, and Firnasil go onto the airship, which will be renamed the Spurka, and they head off. That's when the Nevere airship shows up and, rattles the saber. Coulson uses an instrument in the facility, the psionic airship facility, to contact Alluvia's military all the way back in Holtberg and say, we've got an invasion going on. That is the direct cause of the Alluvian frigate showing up. Now here's where things get bad. The Alluvian frigate and the Nevere frigate exchange fire over the town. This is the first time an airship has fought another airship in the history, in known history in this world. Not to spoil too much, but this is actually the first time it's happened in the history of this world, period. Because even though the Scions had airships, they didn't fight other airships, they fought things on the ground. So this is the first airship-to-airship battle ever. Fun fact, when airship weapons rupture airship cores, effectively an atomic detonation goes off. Except a lot stronger. So as a result of this, a huge chunk of land is completely cratered. There's a huge chunk of the topsoil which is literally vaporized, and the soil that remains is ash going down several feet, just layers upon layers of ash. A few dozen thousand people die in the town and the local landscape, including the refugees who are in this area, who've been fleeing from the onslaught that's been attacking them in the Stonehold region. Yes, by the way, the refugees are going to become a bit of a problem in the near future as well. So, in the wake of this overwhelming devastation, the party has no idea how to deal with this and basically makes their way back to Holtberg, where they uncover a few other interesting facts. First of all, everyone assumes that the devastation, that huge crater, which is actually visible from orbit if you look down at the continent and the skies are clear enough, but that devastation is assumed to be a Nevere superweapon. This is funny because on the other side of things, the Nevere assume it is an Alluvian superweapon. Nobody has actually any real idea of what caused it. Nobody does. They uncover a few other things too. See, when they were fleeing Aphis Lacelle was being attacked by a large number of crude titanium-looking golems. Well, in the wake of this, they have discovered that a large number of the humans who lived on Visay and Lacelle have been evacuated, and they learned that over the past few months that they've been there, the humans had been enslaved by a race calling themselves the Tumarok. The Tumarok had been using the humans as cheap slave labor in order to construct large things that they have no idea what they are or how they work, and of course to mine all those precious, wonderful, infinitely replenishing resources, because again it's constructed of the ley line, so it effectively is a limitless energy source and therefore a resource. The humans are basically treated as trash in Holtberg. This will only get worse over time, but at least they have a place to stay. But also the other refugees coming from the other direction, from the Stonehold region, have started flooding the Alluvian area. And I mean flooding it. You no longer can travel and just see grass or forest or whatever. There's going to be camps of people, literally just people in tents or tarps on the ground everywhere. Literally millions of people. Alluvia decides to go ahead and offer a program for these people to join the military. In exchange, their families are taken care of and they're paid well. Alluvia then sends large contingents of these recruitment corps to the front lines against Nevere. I think you can see how that turns out. In the wake of all this, the party is like, okay, we need to deal with all these situations. So they decide to start consolidating power now. They need the new undermarket and they need it right now. The exchange needs to be strong. So they go north and they go to conquer one of the nearby blocks under a woman named Greta of Firebeard. She's a dwarf. She's awesome. She's intelligent. They successfully best her in battle, and therefore, in so doing, she goes ahead and acquiesces that they are the stronger. Therefore, they have the right to the power, right to the region, and she becomes a vassal, for all intents and purposes, of the exchange, which she still is to this day, I might add. With that done, they decide the next thing they need to do is they need to get a real income resource going. So they arrange a situation with one of the gentlemen in the exchange, one of Zeiss's old friends, a lord elf named Sereth, to basically barter with a Burun lord, a Burun food magnate, all the way down in the Hebian Toe region. I don't want to go too much into the details of that, but because we're going to go into that in a little bit. But the deal is they help him, he trades with them, they trade food to the military, they have money. In the process of doing this, several groups of assassins attack the party simultaneously across Holtberg, which, as I remind you, is a colossally huge city. First, they attack them at the actual hidden veil, which is basically like a substructure of the entire city that isn't actually on the books, but is there and connects most of the city to each other. It's kind of a hidden pathway sort of a thing that the undermarket had used for years and years, which is basically abandoned now. So they are attacked there, and in response to this, they immediately rush out to try and figure out what's what, and they go to Coulson's families, who happens to live in the area, and find that family is under attack. Someone is trying to hurt his niece and his sister. His sister actually wasn't there at the time. But, someone is trying to attack his family, and at the same time, someone's trying to attack Rory's family over on the docks. See, Rory's family had actually made it here from Visayan-Lascelles, again, humans. And so, they come here, and they're literally living in a cargo container, because that's how most humans are living on Holtberg at the time. And yeah, they managed to save everyone. No deaths. Whew, thank goodness. They go back to the Vale, and they find a message for them, basically stating that we could have killed them at any time if we wanted. And they uncover a few facts. First of all, they uncover that these assassins are definitively and provably desolates. And second, they prove that they are coming from the Show region. So no matter what, or at least I should say they escaped to the Show region. Let's make that more clear. So no matter what, they're going down to the Show territories. So they head south to go ahead and deal with the Show magnate, and this is where our party splits into two. We're going to go ahead and cut this particular video off. I have no idea how long I've been talking. I didn't actually think it would take me this long, though. We're going to go ahead and cut this off, and then we'll start talking about what happened in the live campaign, and then we'll do another video talking about what happened in the forum campaign, and then we'll kind of lead those both into some more lore tidbits. So I hope you've enjoyed, and if you have any questions, as always, I welcome them. I'm sure the players welcome them too. I'll see you next time, guys.